I'm going to go back to a question about the three key phrases, words that you've used about yourself: humanitarian, global leader, and change maker, all of which are powerful and resonant phrases. And explain that a little bit more about why that's how you'd like to define yourself, if you don't mind.
Well, first of all, I very deliberately use the word humanitarian. First of all, it's a very powerful word. It's a concept I believe in deeply. It essentially means serving humanity. Something that speaks very strongly to my values. And because of where I come in the sector, I'm a fundraiser, a communicator. I'm often the person in head office who's helping to coordinate raising funds, doing branding, strategic planning. I think what can often happen with people like myself is we get left outside that inner circle of understanding of what it means to be a humanitarian. And so I'm kind of taking a stand by using that word because, in my view, everybody who serves in the UN or the not for profit sector and they go to work every day and they do their jobs really well to make sure that their organisation can better serve humanity is a humanitarian. So I don't care if you're on the front line, obviously, the people who serve on the front line are remarkable, or if you're the person keeping the computers running or running the administration or whatever it is, you are, in my view, a humanitarian. So that's why I describe myself as a humanitarian, and I'd encourage all my other colleagues to do the same. Um, Global leader, I think, um, I particularly use that language because I've worked internationally for many, many years. I recently had to write a list for a visa application of the number of countries that I've worked in, and it came up to 71 countries or something ridiculous.
You
I felt
beat
slightly,
me.
I felt slightly giddy writing it.
Yeah.
I'm very tired, um, but I love international working. And that's not just about having the opportunity to visit different countries and spend time with people in different cultures, although obviously that's a huge privilege. It's the shift in mindset and openness that you have to adopt when you're working with groups of colleagues who come from different continents and different cultures and have different perspectives on things. I love the way that that's challenged me intellectually, and that's a space that I really enjoy being in. And Changemaker, I think, is more specific to the particular career I've had. Um, and I don't know if this was accident or design, but I've tended to take roles and deliver in roles where significant radical change and radical growth was required. And I guess I found I'm quite good at that. Which takes a particular mindset of being prepared to go in and start from a clean sheet of paper, look at the total situation, and think afresh about how you're going to achieve your goals, and I guess make bold decisions. And that is the professional style that I've delivered, and I've enjoyed doing it.
And that's something I always associate you with. I mean, I've seen you go into organizations and create transformational growth, but also perhaps challenging some of the internal culture that was existing. I mean, I remember UNHCR many years,
Yeah,
even before you said fundraisers not welcome here. And
yeah,
by the time you left, there were many more fundraisers and they were at least welcomed by their peers, at least.
I hope so. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, Yes, I mean, I think creating change is obviously there's many books written about that and there's many experts. It is partly about challenge and it's also partly about taking people with you. I have found that what's really important is to acknowledge and respect the people who came before you and the decisions that they made that in their own time were probably really, really good, sound decisions. So it's something about how you create radical change moving forwards, but without disrespecting the heritage that got the organisation to that point. And I think UNHCR is a really good example of that. It's a remarkable organisation. It's achieved so much that's important in the world. It's won 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. Um, when I got there in the early 2000s, it was really only at the beginning of its private
Yeah.
sector journey. It'd only been on that journey for a few years, And as you say, it wasn't um, an understood or accepted part of the culture. Um, and so taking the organisation on that journey was quite complicated, and it involved a lot of persuading, a lot of data, delivering on results, building relationships. So it can be about radical change, but it's also about being willing to get alongside people and listen to their perspectives and all of those good things as well.
It's good to hear, and certainly I know in the written article that we're publishing, you've acknowledged those predecessors, and I
Mm.
think that's something we often don't do. You know, we often think, well, we came in and we made a difference, but other people fought the fight to even get you into the position to be able to make those decisions. So
Absolutely. I mean, when I was hired to UNHCR as a D1 to lead their global private funding, D1 is a sort of director role. The bringing an external expert who did not have a track record of working in UNHCR in at a senior level was actually quite an unusual and radical thing. And that only happened because some of the other colleagues who I mentioned, who I'm sure you'll mention in the article, had argued that case over many years. We can only achieve the growth that the organisation needs so we can better serve refugees if we're willing to bring in external experts who can share that expertise with the organisation. So the very fact, yes, as you're right, the very fact that I was even hired was a radical move on the organisation's part.
it was, I led that search, if you recall, and I remember having the most, probably the strongest argument I've ever had with a client about why they needed to bring in a change maker like you, to the
Wow.
point where I actually challenged the person at UNHCR, even if they made a donation, said, of course not, I'm an employee. I said, that would never stop you donating. I am a donor and I have
Yeah.
a passion for having the right person. That person was you. So well done. But you also created an exceptional relationship, I think, and I've worked myself with many of the UN agencies. Somehow there was a synergy between you and Antonio Gutierrez that
Yeah.
somehow, how did you create that synergy? That's quite an achievement.
Well, I didn't report to him, but I'd say I did. I did. You know, he was the sponsor, if you like, of this change program, and it would not have been possible without him. Um, what shall I say about? I mean, I'm a huge admirer of Antonio Guterres. I'll say that. I'm a
Yeah.
massive fan. And there's a few things about him, of his many qualities, that I think particularly were helpful to us in the private sector program. He's an extremely thoughtful person. He's a very deep thinker. And he is, in my experience, someone who's very gifted at looking ahead at what's coming down the line. So when he joined UNHCR as High Commissioner, I think in 2005, he he saw that the refugee crisis and the situation of refugees on the planet was going to get worse. He could see all the signs, and the fact that the organisation was not properly resourced or equipped to meet the growing needs that it was going to have to deal with in the coming 10 years. So he already identified that he had a funding problem and that he needed to take some really radical steps. One of those radical steps was investing in private sector funding. He's also, I believe, a scientist by background.
Oh, okay.
I might get this wrong, but I believe his professional background before he went into politics is electrical engineering or something
Okay. I
around
didn't know
that
that.
field. But what that meant was is he's exceptionally good with numbers. Of his other skills, he's very good at understanding numbers, number modeling. He'd often have these meetings where he would be looking through these enormous spreadsheets and trying to work out where the resources were and how he could move them around. So what that meant was when I and my team, my wonderful team who did these fantastic modelling around growth and investment, if you give us an extra $10 million, Mr. Guterres, this is what we'll do with it. This is the lifetime value of these donors. This is how it will all play out. Um, Unlike many of the other colleagues in the room, he really understood, and he would ask me very difficult questions. And God help us if there was ever a mistake in the modelling. because he would spot it. He would spot a mistake in the computations that we put in front of him.
Wow.
So I think he was very challenging. He was very demanding. He understood the modeling approach that we were taking around our investment. He was willing to take a stand because he believed in what we were doing. He was willing to take a stand and make sure that we got the investment we needed. So the investment in private sector funding under his leadership radically grew over a number of years. So yeah, no, he was
And
absolutely,
continues to do so. I think he set a trend, eh?
yeah. Well, if it's working,
Yeah. Keep
keep
investing.
doing it. Keep
Yeah.
doing it. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and interesting, he has definitely then used that experience, that really positive experience, to encourage other UN agencies to look at how that was achieved. I think sometimes over optimistically in some cases, but I know from experience, ISO being the most recent, that he's taken that and spoken to the Secretary General and said, if we could do it, you could do it. It takes a bold move, but there is a case study, and you are the case study now at UNHCR.
Absolutely, and I'm delighted to see that. I do have a disappointment about the UN, though. I will just share, I will just put it out there, which
Go for it.
is I think there's a lot of talk in the UN about collaborative working between the different UN agencies, and I know it's authentically meant. I feel the UN could and should do a lot more to cross share learnings, tools, and trainings around how you build effective fundraising and communications programs. I, it's great talking to the chief executives and secretary generals and saying you should do this, but it would be even better if there was then, and here's a team of people and a set of tools and resources that will help you get
That's
through the
true.
early years. So
That's true. And as far as I know, and you may correct me, there is no central support mechanism for
no,
the fledgling programs that many want to try, whether it's at UN Women or even UMFAR for that
no.
matter.
There's
So,
Global Compact, which focuses on work with corporate partnerships, so that
yeah.
area is more covered, but not all of those other issues that we have to work with in fundraising and communications. No.
Well, going from the very top, and we don't get much higher, I guess, than the Secretary General of the United Nations, to the beginning of time, you started in a very small, underfunded charity, in your case, the Alcohol Recovery Project. What did you learn from that experience of being at the ground floor, the bottom, working out of a broom cupboard or a converted broom cupboard, and lots of sleeve rolling up? Tell me how that prepared you for your subsequent career, or how you approach things.
I think the main thing it taught me was humility. It taught me how very very difficult it is. Particularly, I've got huge admiration for organisations that are in the beginning of that journey. It's interesting because whether you're a small addiction charity or a UN agency, that period where you've decided you need to get serious about fundraising but you kind of don't have that muscle memory in the organization. You don't really know
Yeah,
how to do it. You don't know if people will support your cause. That's one of the most difficult periods I think for any organization. And I was the first. I think I was fundraising and communications manager in ARP when they took that decision, and I made lots of mistakes. I mean, I did meet my goals by the skin of my teeth, partly because I submitted a successful national lottery bid, which I was very proud of. But it was tough. It was really tough. Um, I think the other thing I learned, and this was particular to working in a charity that worked with people who had alcohol addictions, is I realised that nearly every person I met, either sitting next to them on a plane or on a bus or at a party, had somebody in their life who'd been affected by alcohol addiction. Um, and so, I had that whole experience of realizing it was really tough to work out how to get our organization in front of the general public. And there were many, many people out there whose lives had been touched in one way or another by alcohol addiction and who wanted to help. So then that took me back to, the challenge that we all wrestle with, which is, well, how do I find those people and how do I get in front of
yeah,
them? But I think the thing that I remember most, the thing I carry with me most from that time, is huge abiding respect for the fundraisers and communicators who work on the front lines in those sort of junior middle management jobs, because I actually think those are the toughest jobs in our sector. You've got goals to meet, you have responsibility, you don't have a huge amount of clout in the organisation, you can't deeply influence how the
No.
organisation behaves, but you've still got to bring those numbers in and people are relying on you. So I try and sort of hold on to that memory of what a tough spot that is to be in.
And those people in the last year, from looking at the research I've seen, both from the UK and the US, they're the ones having the really tough time
Yeah.
because they've still got those targets. They don't
Yeah.
have necessarily the resources, and they don't even have a peer group to necessarily just
Yeah.
go out and either celebrate with, cry with, or just ask advice to. And that's really
Yes. Yeah.
challenging for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And often they don't even get in the room where the senior team
No.
are having the conversations. So
Yeah.
their ability to influence upwards is often quite constrained.
Yeah. I've one of the early things I found when I took a management job on at 27, it was War on Want, head of communications, campaigns, and fundraising, is I had no clue who my peer group was. You know, I had a 5-year fundraising experience for challenging causes, shall we say.
Mm.
I had no idea what a peer group. And I remember one of my colleagues says, well, there's this new thing called the Institute of Fundraising Managers. Maybe you should get involved with. And there's some conference in Holland I think you should go to. And I think it's something like International Fundraising Resource Conference. I don't know. It has some. And on her advice, I went. And I would say that was transformational, both the experience of having a fundraising association, which is what became the Chartered Institute, and the IFC. How important were those kind of organizations, institutions, or networks to you in your career?
Oh, incredibly important, because I hope that things have changed a lot. But when I was starting out on this journey, I didn't realize that what I was doing could be a profession. I didn't realize that they were established, or that they were developing, let's say not established, but developing standards and models about how you problem solve, how you deliver change, how you reach audiences. I was literally sitting in my broom cupboard, kind of trying to work it out in my head. Um, so when I realised that there were trainings I could go to and conferences, it was profound. I think the first training course I went on was one of those Directory of Social Change
Oh, yeah.
training days, and I think it was on trust fundraising. I did a lot of trust fundraising, and of course, in those days, you got these huge
Book
books that you had to buy,
by
and
Michael Norton.
yeah, or if you really didn't have any budget, you'd go to the local library and photocopy pages at the local library of trusts that you could apply for. So I think I went on a training course around how to use the book.
Yeah, that
That was
says
the
a
first
lot, doesn't it?
fundraising training that I did. But yeah, no, it's profound. And then you meet other people, and then you start that process, which I think is really interesting, of hearing different people give talks, going to conferences. And then I think, what I did and many people do is you start observing the values and the sort of style, the intellectual approach of different people, and you start being able to discern, oh, I really like the way that person talks about the work. That person's style, how they talk about the problem speaks to me, and I'm less keen on the way that person. So you're starting to curate,
Mm-hmm.
almost, who are the people I'm going to admire in my sector? Who are the people I'm going to start to think of as role models? Um, because I want to learn how to be more like them, or I want to have some of the skills that they have. So I think that's also a very, we all need role models, whatever
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
absolutely. It's interesting because you value the collegiate and robust colleague over the sparkly stars. Explain what you mean by that. I like that.
Oh, I think there are well, because of what we do, we are partly salespeople. There are a lot of people in our sector who are very good at talking the talk, and they show up very well. They show up very well when they're interviewing for jobs. Um, And they're often, I'm sorry, the people who at conferences are really good on a platform because they have that particular set of skills. But I'm always interested in what have you actually delivered?
Yeah.
What change have you actually delivered? What difference have you actually made in the organisations where you've worked? And if I can be a bit controversial, for me, that isn't I came into organisation X, I criticised everything they'd done before, I created a new strategy, and then I went and took another job after 2 years. Because as I'm sure you see this in recruitment, there are a lot of people who jump from job to
Oh,
job every 2.5 years. That's not enough time to make a difference.
not in a
That's
leadership role, definitely.
not in a leadership role. So the people that I really admire in the sector are often the people who have dug in a little bit more to a cause or a job for more years. They're focused on results. They're willing to do, the backroom work, which isn't so glamorous because they realise it's important.
Mm,
Um, and they're committed to actually delivering substantial change. And in my experience, those people are often the individuals who will also tell the unvarnished truth about the challenges they're facing, what's working and what isn't working, rather than, oh, everything is marvelous.
yeah, yeah,
I guess whenever anybody stands in front of me and says everything is marvelous, there's a certain skepticism.
yeah. Actually, everything's never totally marvelous in fundraising because we always know we could do better and we can always
Yeah,
do something differently. It's
absolutely,
never the case.
absolutely.
And how do we get more of those people? One of the interesting challenges, and this has been going back years now, both in the UK and the US, and very well researched in the US particularly, is we are losing top quality, I would say mid-level, hardworking professional people, which also means we're not feeding into the leadership channel. What are we doing wrong as a sector not to attract more of those really smart people and retain and help develop them? Because it is a crisis and well-researched crisis.
Um, I don't have all the answers to that. I guess I've got a couple of thoughts. I think one of which is, do we sufficiently invest in training and developing people at the beginning of their career, so that they have the tools and resources and competencies they need to flourish?
Yeah,
I think we don't. Um, I was talking to somebody who works in banking recently, who runs the sort of management input program in one of these large banks, and they spend something like an additional 15% on top of the salary
yeah,
bill on constant professional development. And they were saying that their young managers are probably in training and development 30 or 40 days a year.
yeah,
Whereas we know in our sector, and there are reasons for this. Somebody's lucky if they get 2 days worth of training.
yeah,
Um, so are we getting that right? No, I don't think we are. So what does that mean? I think we end up with a lot of people in middle management who are there because they're deeply committed, they're passionate, they're naturally gifted. If they're lucky, they've worked in an organisation that's trained them, but their natural gifts and street smarts have helped get them to where they are. I think then you ask people like that to step into leadership positions, it's tough.
yeah,
You're putting people into leadership positions who don't have all of that background knowledge sort of embedded in their DNA. So that's one issue. So that's sort of the bottom up perspective. I think the other issue is that we know that the cultures in a lot of the organisations we work in they've got something wrong with them. We
yeah,
know this. There are things going wrong in either in a public level or not on a public level in many organisations, good organisations that are doing really good work, and the common thread seems to be insufficient leadership
yeah,
capacity, insufficient understanding of the business of running a large INGO or NGO, and that can make working in these organisations feel quite stressful and not always as rewarding as it should be.
yeah,
So I think that's so you get to middle management or at the beginning of senior management, and you want to change the world, and you're banging up against a culture in your organization where maybe there isn't accountability, or decision making is really slow, or resources are being wasted, or you can't hire staff in quickly enough because the recruitment processes are not good. I mean, all about that. um, it's very demoralizing. And the irony, of course, is I do think as a profession, it's one of the best professions in the world. It's exciting, it's motivating, it's creative, it's intellectually challenging. So it should be an awesome job.
Yeah. As one of
Um,
your former colleagues, in fact, Nancy Aburi, who I interviewed quite recently, she said, if I'd only known at the beginning, this is totally addictive. We are in a very addictive profession. That the
yeah,
desire to do it is so high. But
yeah.
actually, what puts us down is the poor leadership that's often sitting above. Kind of,
But it's interesting that Nancy said that. And of course, I know Nancy, and she's wonderful. I think the addictive word is quite interesting because we know addiction. Yes, it's wonderful,
but it's not good.
but it's not good for us.
No.
And I think a lot of our sector runs on passion and commitment, and that incredible work ethic that many of us have, rather than sitting on good management, good strategy, good resource management, effective human resources, effective training. And
And
that
self
creates,
management, don't you think? Because our
yeah,
capacity to burn ourselves is pretty
yeah,
high, I would say, in the
yeah.
sector.
And I know you've not asked me this, but it's probably the lesson that I've learned over the last 20 years is you can be the leader who taps into that addiction, if you like, to use Nancy's word, or that sort of that powerful work ethic, and you can actually get a huge amount out of people who work in our sector. I think one of the main things I've learned over 20 years is be very careful with that.
Yeah, it's a very good
It's
point.
not healthy, and it's kind of like forcing everybody to run a marathon at sprint pace. You can do it, but you're not doing yourself or your team any favors if you do that. And I've learned to be more balanced around what I ask from people.
Very good point. You also make a point which I like, which is sort of on the similar lines, but you say if there's a piece of advice, say always strive for as much simplicity as possible. And that I find, you've worked in highly complex organizations with many plates spinning in the air at
Yeah.
any given time. Explain a little bit about what you mean by that, because that's quite an interesting concept for me.
Well, we work in an inherently complex operating environment, most of us, where we're having to work with causes, complex missions, uh, funding environments, donor environments, So I'm not saying that the environment or the context we're working in isn't complex. It is,
Yeah.
and you have to understand that complexity. Um, and I think the job of the leader then is to understand all of that complexity, understand what the organization needs to achieve, and then to have the discipline to intellectually boil down and focus what are the three or four moves or the three or four areas where if I lean in and I lean in with energy and discipline, and do those things superbly, what are those that will make the most difference for the organization, and let go of the other stuff. One of the expressions I used to use in one of my jobs was, what are the two or three things that we're going to be obsessed with getting right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other things, I've actually got a very high tolerance with. Either we stop doing them or we kind of do them okay, but we don't sweat them. But what are the two or three things that we're going
Yeah.
to be obsessive about doing really, really well? So that's what I mean by simplicity. I don't mean easy. I mean the simplicity of focus. Um, and I think in our sector, and I think again, a lot of this comes back to training and management and leadership. I think in our sector, there's a little bit of a tendency to overcomplicate and to think that overcomplicating somehow is intellectually more advanced. And um, I don't agree with that. And if you look at the really successful global organizations, that's not what they do. You
No.
know, uh, I'm sure Tim Cook at Apple probably has three things that he's going to achieve in the next 5 years at Apple. He knows what they are, and they're probably very easily expressed, and he could probably put them into three sentences. Um,
And in a box, and it'll look beautiful on the inside as well.
yeah, and it would look beautiful. It would be beautifully written. So I think and for me, that's what drives radical change. Two or three things done superbly. The challenge is, of course, picking the two or three things.
It's, I think that's actually a wonderful note to kind of finish our conversation with, because that's a sound piece of advice that we can apply,
Yeah,
but it's not easy in itself, is it?
it's not easy. No,
No.
no, but it will pay the biggest dividends.
Yeah, we have a friend, Lyndall Stein. I remember she once said to me, Daryl, just focus on the important stuff, not necessarily the urgent stuff. And
Yeah,
I think as a colleague, it was one of the best pieces of advice she gave me. There's always going to be something urgent, but that's not necessarily the most important. And I
yeah,
think your advice on that just now kind of concentrates that and gives it more focus. So,
yeah.
well, thank you, Amanda. Is there any last parting phrase or comment you'd like to give to the colleagues who will be watching this video in due course?
Uh, so I guess what I would say is to any of my colleagues watching this who have worked with me in the past, I apologise if I made you work too hard, um, and that is slightly serious. And I guess, yeah, the counterpoint to that is I would really encourage everybody to look for the joy in this work. It is really hard. We live in difficult times. Um, but we only live once, and so I would really encourage everybody to find the place where they want to work, the way that they want to work, that is most fulfilling and supportive to them. Be brave around sticking out for that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amanda. It's been a joy talking with you, and I wish you every
And
success. Thank
you,
you.
thank you very
Bye
much.
bye.
Bye bye.